An increasing number of companies are purchasing CDR credits to compensate for emissions they can't yet reduce.
This is why Carbon Gap calls on the EU to set out clear regulation on voluntary compensation to provide the clarity many companies are asking for to feel confident investing in CDR.
But there is a catch. To be truly accurate, companies need to be very specific about which types of credits they use and which precise climate claims they make. To that end, at Carbon Gap, we believe that four major principles need to be followed in order to make a sustainable compensation claim. One, you should only use removal credits for compensation, not credit representing avoided emissions. Indeed, if financing avoided emissions elsewhere is always useful, when balancing out your remaining emissions, if you use these types of credits, you're not bringing the world closer to net zero. Two, you must apply the like-for-like principle. When we burn oil and gas, we release in the atmosphere CO2 that would have otherwise stayed underground in geological formations for millions of years. So, if you want to neutralize these emissions, you need to do so in a way that reverts the carbon cycle back to balance. Crucially, this means that you should never compensate fossil fuel emissions with activities that store carbon for a short period, like planting trees. To do so, you must remove this CO2 with CDR methods that store carbon permanently. Three, you must make sure that the credits you buy come from activities where the carbon has already and effectively been removed, so-called ex-post CDR credits. You must be transparent about how you use these credits. To that end, they must be retired on a publicly accessible registry. Four, reaching net zero means that the only emissions you have left are technically or economically impossible to abate. In this case, those hard-to-abate emissions should be compensated with CDR, and only then can the company claim to be net zero. However, we realize that companies aren't there yet. Indeed, getting rid of all remaining emissions that can be abated takes time. But in the meantime, if companies are only allowed to buy CDR for a small volume corresponding to what will eventually be their remaining emissions, we are effectively restricting near-term demand for CDR and endangering the survival of the removal industry as a whole. So, we believe that on their way to net zero, companies that want to buy and use CDR to compensate for all of their remaining emissions should be allowed to do so.
If those principles are followed, then voluntary compensation practices can actually get companies closer to net zero while driving more financing towards CDR scale up.